I'm going to stand up and walk around and disassociate myself from a better dressed panel. People are still piling into the balcony. They're trying to pull in a couple of chairs. So it looks like maybe we should have expanded the Ron Robinson Theater instead of Razorback Stadium. Did you laugh? You laugh.
Is Jeff on here?
No, but President Bob is. I'm sure he appreciated the humor. All right, let's get started. By the way, this is a most memorable and busy decade in Arkansas politics, and we can't get this done in an hour. And we're starting after noon, and Nate says he's paid for the air conditioning for the entire afternoon. So I hope some of you might be able to, don't just start walking out almost at 1 unless you just have to, because I've got a couple things I've got to get to. Plus, I'm taking too much time right now. All right, now, in the course of, sometimes as a writer, you just type in the words, and as I did to this article about the 1970s for Talk Business, and the essence or the theme of what you're writing doesn't occur to you until late in the piece, and that's what happened here. And to set the stage, the context for why we're talking about and celebrating the 1970s, I want to tell you what occurred to me. In 1957, 13 years before the 1970s, Arkansas politics was nationally, internationally discredited. It was known as rural, populist, segregationist, and backward. In 1992, 13 years after the 1970s, Arkansas politics produced a Rhodes Scholar, moderate Democrat who became President of the United States. How did we get from 57 to 92? What happened to change the state? The 1970s. That's how transformational it was. Now, I've got to get this out before we get started, because we spend all our time talking about the fact that the 1970s in Arkansas politics actually began with Winthrop Rockefeller in 1964. And nothing we're discussing here today would have happened probably, or it wouldn't have happened the way it did without the foundation of the transitional, if not transformative governorship of Winthrop Rockefeller. So he's here as the foundation for what we're talking about. Now, quickly the introduction. Let me tell you, if you were going to talk about the 1970s in Arkansas politics, and you wanted to get three guys who were all lathered up in it like nobody else, and who can remember a lot of it, these three guys right here. Let me do brief introductions of the three. In the middle, making a rare public appearance, down from Fayetteville, with a brand new haircut. Really, that's the haircut. Archie Shaffer. Archie Shaffer. Nephew of Uncle and Governor Dale Bumpers, executive secretary at the age of 23 or so, top aide to Governor Bumpers, top aide to Senator Bumpers. In 1978, the campaign manager in the epic close Democratic primary Senate race for Ray Thornton. A couple more things about him. In about 1974, there was an opening on the Arkansas State University Board of Trustees, and Archie went to Uncle Dale and said, "There's this guy I was pledge trainer for up at ASU. He's about 25 or 26. He's just started a law career in Searcy. What about Mike Beebe?" So, the man who thrust Mike Beebe on us. But not all of his recommendations were as smooth and uneventful as that. He also encouraged Uncle Dale, the governor, to appoint as executive secretary of the Arkansas Democratic Party his good friend Craig Campbell, who promptly went out and told the press he had voted for Nixon in 1972. Ernie Dumas. Everyone but me says he's the greatest Arkansas political journalist of our time. Certainly of the 70s, certainly of his generation, and a great storyteller. Let me say now, if I start to cut him off, it's not from a lack of respect, but one story reminds him of another, and he might embellish. All right. Former United States Senator and Governor, current U.S. Board of Trustee member, David Pryor. There was a column in the paper the other day, don't know who wrote it, a guy who fires arrows in his column. He gave Senator Pryor an arrow up, and he said, there's no one else who has a career in progressive Arkansas politics that matches Senator Pryor. 50 years. He's bookended by, in the early 1960s, a young Turk reform state legislator fighting machine politics, to just the other day fighting the nuclear arms race of college football. Nobody. Here's what the guy wrote, and forgive me for this, Senator, I know you're easily embarrassed. Be not misled by the all-shucks appearance of meekness. There's the hungry soul of a proud liberal lurking within. Probably better I said that than when he was running for office. All right, let's go. Let's get started. Archie, and then for everybody, let's start with nephew Archie. June 12, 1970. Right? Dale Bumpers at the Lafayette Hotel announces for governor, the Democratic nomination for governor. He has name recognition ranging from 0 to 1%. June 12, 1970. In late August, barely 2 months later, he gets into a runoff with Orville Falls. 2 weeks after that, early September, he wins the runoff easily. Less than 2 months after that, November, he is overwhelmingly elected with 62%, defeating Winthrop Rockefeller to governor of Arkansas. From June, think about how long Trump's been running. June, one summer, less than 5 months, the state was changed. Remarkable. Archie and then Ernie and the Senator, I want everybody on this. What was the lightning that struck? How did it happen? How did it happen and why did it happen? How did it happen so fast? Archie, go first.
Thanks, John. Before I answer that, try to answer it, I wanted to acknowledge my good friend Ron Robinson, who this theater is named for. Ron and I have been friends for 50 years. He's been as involved in Arkansas politics for the last 50 years as any of us, probably knows as much about it or more than any of us on the stage today. And I talked to Ron this morning on my drive down. I spent about an hour on the phone with him, and he fact-checking and hearing Ron Robinson's stories. So you'll hear some of Ron through me today. But 1970 was an interesting time. The world has changed so many times since then. Thank God it was before we had social media and cell phones, iPhone cameras and what have you, or what happened in 1970 surely would never have happened. But I had just finished my first year in medical school when my famous Uncle Dale, who I also should acknowledge is not really my uncle, he tried to claim it for 40 or 50 years. But Betty Bumpers is my aunt. Planning on the side of the Bumpers rather than the Bumpers side. I had just finished my first year in medical school. Uncle Dale had been thinking about running. I meant to bring today, and I forgot, a bumper sticker that my father and the Bumpers hometown headquarters produced in early 1970 that was orange and black. It said, "Another bumper for bumpers." After we hired DeLoss Walker, a he told us we had to get rid of that orange and black. There was no room for levity in politics and whatever. He announced as the last candidate in an 8-man race on June 12th in the lobby of the Lafayette Hotel. Ernie Dumas was there, along with Herbie Bird. I don't remember Ernie, but Herbie Bird, remember Herbie Bird was there. But it was a different time, and Bumper's success in 1970 was due largely to his unbelievable talent at communicating and meeting people and never forgetting anybody. He was as good as Bill Thornton, I would say. But we started out just the two of us driving across the state in a Chevy Impala that the Chevy dealer in Charleston had loaned for the campaign. And his personal magnetism and charisma just began to shine through pretty quickly everywhere we went. And he was unbelievable on TV. That was in the early days of television and radio. Radio then was much more important than it is now. But we did the regular radio show. But we knew at the beginning, and I could ramble on forever, we knew at the beginning that the game was getting into the runoff against Orville Faubus. Faubus was making his first comeback. We knew that Faubus was going to lead the ticket, and the goal was to try and figure out how to beat Joe Purcell and Hayes McClurkin and the other 4 or 5 people that were in the race and get in the runoff against Faubus. And that Faubus would get most of the votes he was going to get in that first primary, and sure enough, that's what happened. We squeaked into the runoff against Faubus and got most of the votes the other candidates got in the runoff, and the rest is history, as they say. So it was a different time technologically, and he couldn't do the same thing now. I would say.
Ernie, tell us about covering that event at Lafayette Hotel, and Dale Bumper's concern about how well his announcement had gone or hadn't gone. Tell us about that.
Well, first of all, you remember there were 8 people filed that year. That's the largest field of candidates since sometime maybe in the 30s. And he was the least known of everybody in the race. There were 8 of them, beginning with Orville Faubus, who of course was known by everybody in the state. Joe Purcell, who was the Attorney General at the time, Hayes McClurkin, who was the Speaker of the House of Representatives, Bill Wells, who had been the Democratic nominee for governor 2 years earlier, Bob Compton, who was a president of the Arkansas Bar Association, celebrated trial lawyer, Jim Malone, who was a catfish farmer who had been a stand-in. His daddy had run for governor in 1944, came pretty close. And he was a stand-in for Orville Faubus. When Orville was out on the front, he couldn't make it. Jim Malone, he's supposed to be a legendary speaker. I never saw it, but that counted the evidence of it, but he was supposed to be a great speaker. And a guy named Bill Cheek, a bigot from West Memphis, who was funny. He was a funny guy on the stump. And he was a little bit better known than Dale Bumpers and founded Dale Bumpers. So that's what you had. But Dale, besides being a remarkable politician, maybe the best in some ways that we've ever seen, beyond that, he had a strategy for the race. It sounded goofy, but he thought when he started, my secret is I'm unknown. And he thought that was his advantage, to be totally unknown. And he went to the poll show and had less than 1% name recognition when the race started. But he thought that was going to be an advantage because he had no skeletons in his closet. He couldn't be tied in with all the various scandals that had been unearthed the last 5 or 6 years. He was obviously not a part of the establishment. He had no connection with the Rockefeller and all of the Rockefeller's troubles. So he thought that was an advantage. And he knew that he was a great speaker. And Dale Bumpers had confidence. He had a great deal of confidence. He had been a trial lawyer at the little town of Charleston, and he had tried many cases all over the state. He tried big cases in Little Rock. He defended many burglars and fraud artists and drunks and so forth over it. And he had lost 2 jury trials in all those years. And he beat some of the big law firms in Little Rock. They're celebrated lawyers. So he thought, I can do this thing. I can beat all these guys out on the stump. And at that time, we were in a kind of transition from the old days of counting where every night you had a rally someplace, you went around and spoke on courthouse squares, and there'd be constant rallies. And I can do pretty well there. And all of those things turned out to be true. Plus, he said, if I can just raise a little bit of money. And so he sold some cattle, got $10,000. He went and hit up his brother and sister in Ohio. They went up and pitched in $20,000, and the other $15,000. So he had $50,000. And so he spent that wisely. He did 3 television, he'd take 3 little 30-minute television spots, one of them about education, low teacher salaries. We can't get ahead if we have a 50th school system in America. One on another spot on health care, which is his big issue, particularly rural health care. He's going to do something to improve health care, particularly in rural Arkansas. And the third one about we have these deplorable parks. We don't do anything to protect our environment. So those are the 3 he did. Little 30-second things that he would just set up and without a script, extemporaneously. And all of them were very effective, and he spent about $10,000 putting little spots all over the state in every television station to get himself well known. And finally, he was lucky. Nobody had a lot of money with all them people to race, but KATV called with him not too long before the first primary and said some show had been canceled. They had 30 minutes, and they'd give him 30 minutes for $150. So he went out and did stand up 30 minutes, and it was wonderful. So he was lucky, and he later said I was the luckiest guy around. Plus, Jim Powell at the Arkansas Gazette wrote a series of editorials talking about how great the bumpers was. And he thought that had a lot to do with it. Plus, we're going to talk a little bit. You want me to talk a little bit? Yeah, okay. We're going to, about that day, that announcement. He left Charleston to get a haircut because he said that the barber over at Charleston always gave him a lousy haircut, cut too much hair off. So he said they're having these slick barbers down in Little Rock. So he's going to give his announcement at the back in the bar, at the grill at the Lafayette Hotel. So he found a barber there and got a haircut. And he said it's the worst haircut I've ever seen. Just almost scalped him. And so he went into the press conference feeling terrible about that. And the reporters all laughed at him, which included me for the Gazette, seemed to be laughing at him, and the questions were kind of condescending. And he left there feeling just awful. What in hell had I done? Plus, the Democrat comes out in the afternoon, and he said, and I quote from him later, he said, I look like I was a serial killer. So he said, he went home that night depressed, thought he just might as well pull out a race. But in the end, of course, everything worked out for him.
Okay, our time's up. I've got to condense this outline now because I don't want to cut into the stories. I just want to limit the opportunities. I was going to mention now to Ernie that Bumper's governorship was voted by historians the best in the state's history, at least in the 20th century. And I was going to ask Ernie to justify that ranking. I dare not. It's a long list of accomplishments. You know what they are. But we've got to move to 1972. Senator Pryor, I'd like to include you in this discussion. The best part of writing this article was going down to Senator Pryor's office. It's like a museum of contemporary Arkansas history. And having them sit there and remember. And that was the key to this article. But in the course of it, Senator, and I think I got this wrong, and you can correct me, but your epic race, your challenge as a congressman in 1972 to John McClellan, you said, I believe, that you really didn't have any burning philosophical issue, but you were wanting to amount to something in your political career, and you had offended the Southern House Democratic leadership with some position on the Mississippi delegation or race. And you'd also had somebody who just have to say, just take a look at this and how long will it take me to get to the chairmanship of a committee, and they told you a long time.
35 years.
So for that burning reason, I just answered your question for me. But Apple found that, and because this is another example of you're being brave and ahead of your time with, sorry to interrupt you, but what was it 64? The Mississippi delegation, or 68 or what?
68, the convention of 68.
Well, tell about that.
Well, I was on the, somehow or another, I was on the Credentials Committee in 1968 in Chicago. That was the worst Democratic convention I guess we've ever had. And I was on the Credentials Committee. In fact, I was the parliamentarian for the committee, and being the only member of Congress on the committee at the time. And the issue came up whether to seat which delegation from Mississippi to seat. And it was a very close vote, very emotional situation. Went on for 2 or 3 days. And I voted to seat, as I would call it now, the integrated delegation from Mississippi, and not the all-white delegation chosen by the governor down in Mississippi. And that sort of created what you might say a little feeling with the House membership. I guess you would call it the so-called Dixiecrat coalition in the House, especially the Mississippi delegation, and I was sort of ostracized from that. I further became ostracized and deepened the chasm, I guess you'd say, between myself and the House leadership when I took on the American nursing home industry. And that was one which, when I started talking about nursing homes, I wasn't talking about nursing homes in Charleston, which all owned and ran. But when I actually went out into nursing homes and worked as an orderly in 11, I believe, nursing homes on weekends throughout Maryland, Virginia, Washington, D.C., etc., as an orderly to get an idea of what was really going on in some of those very bad nursing home situations. At that time, when I spoke to the House about my findings, and I had taken with me on the last nursing home over in Maryland a photographer from the New York Times who snapped a picture of me shaving an old 90, it's not very old now, but an old 90-year-old man. And that picture of me as a congressman working incognito in nursing homes went viral, as they would say now, but it went worldwide and everywhere. Everywhere this picture was in the New York Times and the Hong Kong Observer, you name it, it was worldwide. And all of a sudden I was inundated with literally thousands of letters, telegrams, and phone calls of people who wanted me to come and inspect the nursing home their grandmother was in. All over the country. I didn't have the staff in the House at that time to deal with this. But what had happened when I got into this issue, what I did, I angered the House leadership, not just the Dixiecrats this time, but the leadership in the U.S. House of Representatives. And I was trying to create a committee on aging in the House, and finally one was created the year after I left, and Claude Pepper became its chairman. But I alienated, I guess you would say, the Dixiecrat wing of the Democrats in the House, and then the leadership wing, and including Speaker Carl Albert of Oklahoma. That's another story. I won't tell you what he said one time. I felt I had to get out of there if I was going to get out of there with any degree of sanity. So I did. I ran for Senate.
And you're doing well. And you got to run off. Ted Boswell was also in that race, am I right? Yeah. And you got to run off with Senator Clellan. And then we had the cookie jar debate. And I want you to talk about that because it was fascinating to think about today, the emphasis on the debates and the preparation time that is spent, bringing in surrogates for the other candidates to practice, and the grilling by staff. Your preparation was to come in on a Saturday before the Sunday debate and go with your good friend and aide, Don Harrell, to the Howard Johnson's own university, to get into a room and talk about what are we going to do. And will you just tell whether you all adopted what you think now is the right tone with being conciliatory, and tell about your remark about the cookie jars, and from in your own words, what happened in that debate?
Well, first, Don Harrell, still lives in New York. He helped me write my book, and thank him to the Butler Center for publishing it. Don was a fabulous wordsmith, without question. He wrote book reviews for many newspapers for years, and professor of English and all this. But Don and I wrote in the Pink Tomato Festival and did all the 8 tomatoes in the contest. Probably that made me sick enough to make enough mistakes. But I drove back up on hot Saturday afternoon, June 11th, I believe, or 10th, back up to Little Rock, and Don and I decided we had to get out of the headquarters. We didn't have a better place to go to think about the debate. So we rented a room at Howard Johnson's Motel out on University Avenue. And we got in the room and we started saying, okay, tomorrow night's this debate. Now, what are we going to do? What sort of a tempo are we going to have? And we started to try to anticipate. We didn't have anyone else with us to think about this. But we tried to anticipate Senator McClellan, his frame of mind, where he was mentally, physically, and we even thought about what he might be wearing. I thought he would be wearing a black suit and a red tie and white shirt, and in fact he wore to the debate a solid white, he looked like a southern planter. It was amazing. He even wore Senator John McClellan, if you could imagine this, a pair of white patent leather boots. I've never seen him wear a pair of patent leather boots, especially white, but they matched his suit. He had on a red tie, and he came in there tough. And we said, you know, he's in his 70s, I'm in my 30s. Let's kind of choose not to be too tough. Let's be a little bit careful about what we say about Senator McClellan and respecting his age, etc. And at that time, we made the decision. And that's where the idea of the cookie jar came about. I was being accused of taking a lot of labor union money. Had anyone run against Senator McClellan in that particular runoff, they would have gotten labor union money, not necessarily just me, but anyone who would have been running. They probably wanted Senator Dale Bumpers to be running at that time, then Governor Bumpers, but it didn't work out that way. And we decided, well, we'll just use the idea of a cookie jar, people into the cookie jar and give the campaign contributions and whatever. And so I guess that's how the cookie jar issue came about and how it was used in the debate. He seized on that.
That's where I was headed.
He seized on it.
I wanted you to imitate him.
He did. And when he did, I was sitting there watching him. It was live, Channel 7, Sunday night before the election on Tuesday. And when he seized on that particular point about the cookie jar, I started saying, where's John Carroll? I want to see him. I didn't vote. I made it. But I knew that he had seized on it. He made some points. He came off tough, which he was tough. And I think we came off way too mild. And I think that they helped to change the course of the election. A lot of people still today, I can go to the grocery store this afternoon, and still today I'll be looking at the counter or whatever, and someone will come up and says, and I probably won 14 elections since that time, but someone will come up and say, let me tell you why you lost that race in 72. I want to know. And so many people would come up to me still today. Archie and Ernie know all about this, and they'll say, by the way, I was in college, it was the first time I ever voted, first campaign I ever was involved in, and I worked in your campaign and whatever, and so we got a lot of young people, I think, involved. We were not successful, but it was an interesting one. The interesting part about this one. A little bit of history. John McClellan, when he had practiced law, Malvern had come over to Camden after his defeat, when he was defeated for Congress, for the House. Isn't that right, Ernie?
Senate.
For the Senate, he was defeated. And he moved to Camden, and because the Goin Sippert law firm needed a trial lawyer, they hired Senator McClellan to come to Camden. That was my hometown. And when he was almost at the end of the race, he had run out of money. He was running for the Senate. He had run out of money. He had lost 2 of his 3 sons, I believe, by that time. And my dad went over across the street on a Saturday afternoon to his office to say, John, I hear you're depressed about stuff, and what's this rumor that you may not complete this race? He said, Edgar, I'm sitting here typing my withdrawal statement from the campaign for the U.S. Senate. Dad said, what do you mean you can't withdraw? He said, I need $10,000. I don't have it. I lost 2 of my 3 sons. I'm depressed, and blah, blah, blah. Went on further. And my dad said, well, don't do anything yet. And my dad called up Mr. Folks, who owned the Great Debt Company, Great Debt, and he called up Don Harrell, Don Harrell's father. Don Harrell had helped me. And he called up W.A. Red Daniel and said, we're going to open the bank up this afternoon, First National Bank, Citizens Bank at that time. And they called up Mr. Hurt, Garland Hurt. That's a good name for a bank president. And they went over across the street. Mr. Hurt opened the bank, and 4 of them signed a note for $10,000 and gave it to Senator McClellan that afternoon. He stayed in the race. He won the race. He became a United States Senator. That's just a little bit of funny Arkansas history, or twist. In Arkansas history, I always think it's kind of fascinating.
Thanks for that. I wish you told me that for the article. Ernie, did you cover that 72 book? Do you remember?
I remember that. I don't know whether I wrote the story about the debate that night, but
Well,
I
you saw
remember it very well. And I saw it, and I remember the great line from the put down line from John McClellan, and when you said that these are nickels and dimes from the overalls and the overall pants and the cookie jars of the working men and women of Arkansas.
And George Fisher did the cartoon,
Yeah.
reaching in the cookie.
Yeah, great, one of Fisher's great cartoons. And so he comes back and he gives some figures about how much money from the Teamsters Union or whatever. And he says, now, David, these ain't no cookie jar and nickels. That was put down in there.
Do you think that made the difference in the runoff?
Well, yeah, I think the debate made some difference. Plus, they spent a lot of money. They made a heroic effort in that runoff. After the first primary, and you finished really just neck and neck. And you had Senator McClellan, and then Foster Johnson and Ted Boswell, this other guy, got fewer votes. But so it was very neck and neck. And the theory was that if an incumbent gets in a runoff, he's beaten. And that was everybody's theory. And he got only about 43 or 44%. So he was way behind. And Ted Boswell, all his liberal supporters were obviously going to go for you. So, but what they did, they had a meeting down at the, Whit Stevens called a meeting down at the Union Bank building and got all of the people in the machine with wealth. East Arkansas planters, Old Fort Smith, Arkansas best people. And they all came together, and John McClellan made a little talk to them and said, now boys, I put up a good fight, and I appreciate all you guys have done, but it looks like I'm dead in the water, and I think I'll just go back home and then let this thing pan out, and I've had a great career. And Whit said, now we can't let that happen. And he said, now, I want to go around the table and ask each one of you to say how much money you'll kick in to get this thing off the ground in the runoff. And they all went, okay, I'll give 5,000, somebody give 15. And got in, and Whit said, all right, well, I'll put up what's left. Of course, there's nothing left. They raised all that money, and they put it out in a mammoth effort in every single county, getting a list of everybody who didn't vote and calling them and taking them to polls. So it was a superhuman organizational effort that I think won it in the end. Debate had some role.
Okay. Archie, I'll get back to you in a minute, but we got to get the man who was most on the ballot in the 70s is Senator Pryor. 2 epic Senate races. We'll get to the other one in a minute. 2 terms of government. And I'm always squeamish when there's conversation about historians ranking Dale Bunker's greatest governor ever based on the myriad reforms that took place. And I'm wondering what David Pryor's thinking about that.
I feel just like you do when they tell you about Ernie Dumas.
You really think those are the same thing? I was trying to be generous. You didn't have the opportunity to be as transformational as Bumpers because of all that Bumpers had accomplished. Plus, you didn't have the money. And the first story I covered after the Log Cabin Democrat let me do some political reporting in 1970. When was the Arkansas plan? 75, 76, 75. Was to go down to Tratton Hall where you announced your big home rule initiative called the Arkansas Plan.
Otherwise known as the coon dog.
Coon dog, yeah. You got the cookie jar debate and the coon dog plan. I don't know any other way to ask this. I just didn't get it. We're gonna reduce the state tax base and let the cities and counties make it up if they. What was that all about? What was the Arkansas plan all about?
Well, Senator Lloyd George, Representative Lloyd George, who was not only one of my best pals, and I served in the legislature with him, Lloyd Reed George from Yale County. Lloyd, we took him up to Mount Nebo one night and had fight boards and everything. He went through the Arkansas plan. It does this, it does this, it doesn't do this, it does this. We went through about an hour and a half of that, and Lloyd looked at it. We said, well, Lloyd, what do you think? Can you handle this for us in the House? And he said, I don't understand one thing about this plan, but I'm for it all the way. Then we got into the Arkansas plan. And I must tell you, everybody said, oh, no, you're so sorry you got all that Arkansas plan. Tell you the truth, I never had a better time. We rented a bus. We went all over the state. We took the cabinet with us. We went to Jonesboro. We went to El Dorado. We went to Texarkana. We went everywhere. And we told them what the plan did. We had huge gatherings at town meetings. And it was really, I thought it was kind of a thrilling civics lesson, to be honest with you, for about 2 or 3 weeks of traveling the state with the team that we had to explain the Arkansas plan, what it did. It not only emphasized home rule, it also, depending on your point of view, it was populism as at its best or at its worst, whichever your point of view might be. It also had something that Arch Ford and I concocted, and that was, and by the way, the Butler Center is just now coming out, David, with a new book on Arch Ford. I read about half of it. It's wonderful. And this, in Arkansas, embedded in the Arkansas plan, and Ernie would remember this, was a formula for education, and where the money would follow the child, rather than giving to rather than giving a school district that maybe didn't even exist almost, but the money would follow the child. As my friend, mentor, and pal, the late Dooley Womack, state senator, told me one day when we were about to take another licking on the Arkansas plan in the state senate and the House, he says, Dave, the only ones for this Arkansas plan right now are the preachers and the soda jerks. I'm beginning to worry about the preachers. We really had a great time in trying to pass it. We passed some parts of it. We did create the Department of Local Services, which was ultimately abolished, but it was an attempt to sort of localize state government and send more government back to the local counties and back to the local cities. Didn't work out that way, but I had no regrets about doing it, and I thought it was a fun experience.
Let me tell a quick story if I've got a moment, John. about
As long as it's quick, I'm
yeah.
sure it will.
So one of your first stops with the bus was to Jonesboro. And I went out there to cover it for the Gazette, and you made the pitch to a pretty big crowd here in the auditorium. And you said, we're going to cut your taxes, and then at the state level, and then you can come back here at home, and you can levy some taxes here to support local services like schools and streets or whatever, or you can take it and buy a new coon dog. So I quoted that. Here's the top of my story the next morning on the front page of the Gazette. George Fisher then drew a picture of David Pryor with his coon dog, and that coon dog followed you. I bet there were 100 cartoons. The coon dog is always there.
George always had had Bill Clinton riding a tricycle. He always had me with a coon dog with a leash on there. And speaking of all that territory, I see Governor Jim Guy Tucker out here. Jim Guy last Saturday at noon, about this time, we had our wonderful grandson from New York, who's sitting right over here, David Pryor. He's 10 years old. We had him up at Mountain View, and we were in the Rainbow Cafe at Mountain View. It was packed. And they said, here's where Jim Guy Tucker was just 3 weeks ago. They had a little sign where Jim Guy Tucker was. In the Rainbow Cafe in Mountain View. So anyway, what a great state we have, and I've had a good time doing all of this.
I don't think there's another state with the overlapping, intimate, contradictory, wonderful personal relationships of the politicians. I don't think there is. But is Governor Tucker still here? Did he get down there? Something we said?
Hey, John,
Go ahead.
I want Archie to tell that story about the Pinto.
What is the context
The
of it?
Ford Pinto. It's about his Uncle Dave. Now tell that story. I love it. If you don't tell it, I am, but you tell it.
I would really rather you tell it.
No.
You tell it much better than I do.
Well, I'll just make it very quick. Dale and I used to do dog and pony shows, and in late life, I got where I couldn't remember the punchlines, and he filled in for me. And he couldn't remember his punchlines, and so I would fill in for him. But Dale, when he became governor, we had an oil crisis, as we remember, oil embargo and all that kind of business back in, 73. And Dale announced that all the state departments, Department of Education, Department of Health, Department of Prison, all going to drive Ford Pintos. We're going to save on gas. Well, Dale was holding a press conference, and John Bennett of the Commercial Appeal was there, always wanting to needle Dale and then me and whoever else was the governor. And sure enough, Dale drives up to announce that everybody was going to start driving Ford Pintos. He drives up being driven by a state trooper in that long, dark blue Lincoln. Dale comes into the press conference room and says, all the state employees, all the state agencies are going to start driving Ford Pintos. We're going to save X amount of dollars. Archie is standing back there in the shadows, and John Bennett said, well, Governor Bumper said, you're driving that big gas hauled Lincoln out there. How can you do this? He said, well, I've ordered a Pinto for myself to drive. So we get back in the office. Archie's there, he's chief of staff, and closes the door and says, Uncle Dave, we hadn't ordered any Ford Pintos. And he says, you have now. Did you ever drive any or not? I don't know.
I don't think so.
All right, let's move to 1978, and this is the wonderfully overlapping, enduring relationships of Arkansas politics. 3 Democratic candidates for the United States Senate in an age when the Republicans, glory days for many of you here, the Republicans just didn't matter. And it was the 3 candidates were Governor David Pryor, Congressman Jim Guy Tucker, who I was going to throw a microphone out to, but he left, and Ray Thornton. You had this man and this man. These guys are good buddies, enduring friends. But you weren't David Pryor's campaign manager. You were Thornton's campaign manager.
Right, Jack Williams, who's sitting right there with David Pryor's campaign.
Explain all that to me. And in the course of explaining it, I don't remember, I was young, but were there any issues? Was there any room between any of you guys on the issues? Archie, and then you, Senator.
I don't think there was any real issues between the three. I mean, it was one of those situations where there were three good guys that all wanted the same job, and they all decided to run, and it turned out the way it did. So I don't remember there being any major arguments or disagreements or anything between the three.
Well, explain to us how Dale Bunker's nephew and a good friend of David Pryor, and friendship as you as closely today, how you were Thornton's guys. What was it? Did that have to do with your friend Craig Campbell, who I mentioned earlier, and the Stevensons and the connection there?
It had something to do with that, yes. I had left Bumper's staff in Washington the year before and moved back to Charleston. And I was back in Charleston running my family's business when Ray at Thornton decided to run for the Senate. And my friend Craig Campbell, who we don't have time to tell the story about him getting elected head of the state party, that's a classic story itself. But he and his Uncle Whit recruited me to come to Little Rock and run Ray's campaign. Whit Stevens detested my Uncle Dale. They never got along. Whit never supported Bumpers, but Whit and I got along well, partly because I was good friends with Craig. But that's how that came to be, and I came to Little Rock that spring of '78 to manage Ray's campaign. We came close.
Senator Pryor, can you think of any, I know in the runoff with you and Tucker there was a couple of things flared up, but in terms of issues that were major burning differences between you three guys, can you recall any?
No. I think we have all been involved with various little groups and subgroups out in the counties and had all drawn, I guess, made campaign contributions from some of the same people. I knew full well that in that race that because Ray Thornton was in the race, that he would have the support of the Stevens family, with Stevens and Jack, and their organization is potent, I can tell you that. And but I didn't see any philosophical differences between Ray and myself and Jim Guy at that time.
One interesting thing about that race that I had forgotten all about until, I'm sorry, Jim Guy left. I forgot all about until last week when Jim Guy spoke to political animals in Fayetteville, and we were talking about the '78 Senate race, and I was reminded that there was a fourth candidate in that race. And I bet none of you can remember who that was, and I didn't even remember that there was a fourth candidate, much less who it was. But there was a guy named A.C. Grigson from Texarkana who was in that race as well and got about 8,000 votes. DP got 34% of the vote. Jim Guy got 33, Ray got 32, and A.C. Grigson got 1.4% of the vote. If A.C. had not been in the race, Ray might have slipped past Jim Guy and been in a runoff with Senator Pryor, and who knows what would have happened.
Was Foster Johnson in that race?
No,
that was
That was the only race he wasn't.
Foster was fascinating. I always liked his method of advertising. I don't know how he got in, where he got these made, but he was the envy of the people running for office. Foster had these metal signs that white and beautiful, snow white with black. Foster Johnson didn't say what he was running for, or anything like that, but just had his name. And he would go out and nail them up to the trees. They're still out there somewhere.
He had there for 2 years, for a number of years, but he still had his signs out.
Yeah, they're still out there somewhere. Hey, John, one thing about the Stevens family I wanted to say.
yes. And I want you to say,
John, when Whit Stevens called the meeting together, they already mentioned, and as they call it, that was a put session, and put up, and they had a put session and for Senator McClellan. Well, 2 years later, Dale was running against Fulbright, or about to announce. And I had encouraged Dale Bumpers to run for president and not run against Fulbright. I was trying to get Dale to get in there and be a Jimmy Carter and run not from Plains, Georgia, but to run from Charleston, Arkansas.
And he would have won.
He would have won. He would have been a much better candidate and a much better president than Jimmy Carter, all due respect to Jimmy Carter. But Whit Stevens and the Stevens group had been, of course, strong from McClellan. 2 years later, I had been on my first time ever to be in Aspen, Colorado to go skiing, and I broke my right ankle. Barbara and I were there with some friends, and I had a problem and had to go to the hospital when I got back because of blood clot in that ankle. But I was lying there one night about 8 o'clock, and the nurse comes in and says, "You're not supposed to talk to anyone on the phone, but there's a man named Mr. W.R. Whit Stevens that wants to talk to you." And I said, "Really?" Okay. So I get on the phone and I said, "Hello, this is David Pryor." And he says, "Son, this is Whit." And I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "I helped beat you 2 years ago. Now, will you accept my support this go around?" I said, "You bet." So that's just Arkansas politics. That was the race in which I was running for governor, and that was Faulkner. He turned on his old friend Faulkner that year and helped me, and I accepted his help, and I appreciate it. Of course, years later, when I was running for the Senate, he supported naturally his own nephew, David.
All right. I've been told it's about time, but I can go 15 minutes over and stay with us if you can. What I think I'll do, I got a wrap-up question, and then somebody, if anybody wants to get involved, that'll be fine. I think I forgot to say when I introduced the subject that I think what defined the 70s was that in Arkansas politics they were about moderation and modernization. Our political attitude toward race, our political attitude toward the size and role of government, the tenor of our politics, moderated, and we attempted to modernize our government, and modernize our economy, and that's through these spectacularly interesting political figures that we had. Here's my question. Here we are in 2016. Is that era, if you'll accept that it was an era, it was launched by the 70s, it produced a president of the United States, it produced a descendant like Mike Beebe, had an occasional interruption with a Frank White or a Mike Huckabee, but generally a defining era. Is it dead now? Did it die with the Republican Revolution from 20 to 2016? Or does anybody agree with me that it's hanging on by Asa Hutchinson's fingernails? That we're still a state where the Republican governor can be rare among southern states and expanding Medicaid? Still a place where he wants to...
He didn't expand it, though.
I know, but he... Okay, all right. You're going to say it's dead, right? Tell me, is it still lingering at all, or is it over, and are we in a new and different era? Ernest?
Yes, the last.
It's completely done.
I think so. For our time.
Well, that's sad, isn't it? What kind of era do you think we're on now? Briefly, please. One word would probably suffice.
The Republican Party and the modern Republican Party, which is totally different from the Republican Party of the Rockefeller era. Rockefeller, by the way, was the most liberal governor in Arkansas history, I think, easily surpassing Dale Bumpers and David Pryor and Bill Clinton. But I think it's dead, and I don't see anything for the foreseeable future happening to reverse that, to go back to the activist government.
Anybody else want to tackle that?
No, I was just looking over there. I was thinking about how I would answer if I were asked that question. I don't know how to answer it because I don't know the answer to it. You need a smart guy like Skip Rutherford up here to do it. I see him over there. But I think too that what has changed is not necessarily just limited to the political parties and the base of each of our parties. But I think what has also changed is the way people get their news. And it is a new day. It is just a new, look at last night in Dallas. At 9 o'clock, we were thinking about Baton Rouge, we were thinking about Minneapolis or wherever the shooting was there. And then within a matter of 6 or 8 minutes, the world's attention was on Dallas, Texas. And it stayed there all night and still on there today. But how people get their news. The other thing that has changed, I think, too, has been the enormous change of local ownership of our small weekly and daily papers out in the state. We had the strongest, most progressive, courageous weekly and daily papers for generations out there. The inspiration, of course, was the old Arkansas Gazette. And then each, like the Warren Eagle Democrat, the Dumas Clarion, the Cabot Star here, all these wonderful little papers out there that held their communities together, that fought for what I would call the right things, for progressive things. I just am afraid that that is something that we're losing, and I'm sorry to see it go down.
All right.
We really, I know everybody wants to know everything that's going on all the time, but it's, you know, I don't know how it will all shake out, but I think we really do have too much information, and a lot of times the information is not accurate because the media is more interested in getting there first instead of getting it right, particularly the broadcast media. But I've said for a number of years, kind of half jokingly, that Ted Turner's invention of the 24-hour news cycle was going to lead to the destruction of Western civilization. back in the good old days when we had 15 minutes of Huntley Brinkley or Walter Cronkite, things seemed to work a lot better than they do now, when you can turn your TV on any time of the day or night and find out what just happened in Dallas or anywhere else in the world.
I couldn't agree more. There was never a better time in Arkansas than the late 1980s when I was writing a column 6 days a week in the Arkansas Gazette. And people had to go there to see what was going on.